The evolution in the bank, in part, it's about improving operational efficiency and effectiveness, but it's also about other things, partnerships and engagement with a wide variety of actors. And fundamental to this, and the reason for us all being here together today, is partnerships with civil society and other non-state actors, and mechanisms that can help bridge and convene and bring together governments, the private sector, civil society actors, social innovators, and the World Bank Group and other traditional donors. And so we are in a context where we're in transition in terms of our engagement on citizen and civic engagement. For the last, our engagement with civil society has lasted at least 40 years so far, and over the last 10 years, the Global Programme for Social Accountability has been one of the chief mechanisms for supporting a lot of our work in this area. Now, the GPSA is actually ending next year, and we're in the process of setting up a new facility, which we're calling CIVIC, the Civil Society and Social Innovation Alliance. And I think there's some documents on the tables about this. So we're trying to get this off the ground at the moment, and the Green Accountability Platform, and that's the focus of this particular session, is, in a sense, it's serving as proof of concept for the new facility for CIVIC. And the Green Accountability Platform is being supported from the remaining funds under the GPSA Multi-Donor Trust Fund. And we're in the process now of trying to fundraise both internally and externally for CIVIC. Let me just say a bit more about we're living in a world of compound social crises. The intersections of climate change, of fragility, pandemics, and widening inequality are already they're undermining global development gains, and they disproportionately affect those who are least responsible. And so now more than ever, we need equitable, participatory, and innovative solutions that ensure that no one is left behind. And if we look at recent events in countries like Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, Kenya, Senegal, and many other countries where government legitimacy is contested, there's been social upheaval, and it really brings home to us how critical it is to pay attention to all voices and to engage with civil society institutions as an integral part of the development progress. And that's really what CIVIC is intended to be. It's meant to be a facility to help support civil society organizations and other social economy actors with a development objective to bridge civil society, social innovators, the bank, governments, to identify and support scalable, people-driven solutions for a livable planet. The intent of this is to operate with certain core themes, a platform-based approach. And at least initially, the platforms would be around climate action and green accountability. This platform is a kind of bridge over into that, but also gender equality, youth empowerment, youth engagement, and potentially health. And then there's scope to be able to extend into other thematic areas as well as it evolves. So the idea is to create communities of practitioners working on these shared priority themes, and to have as broad outreach as possible to networks of civil society organizations of various kinds. So we're going to hear a lot more about this this afternoon. The bank, another part of the transition that's going on at the moment is the replenishment of the concessional financing arm of the World Bank. We call it IDA, the International Development Association. This is the 21st replenishment, and it's really critical for financing development in the poorest countries around the world. And we see CIVIC and our corporate commitments on citizen and civic engagement as a core plank in the narrative that underlies the rationale for IDA 21, really ensuring that the financing under IDA 21 can help deliver inclusive, accountable solutions that are better aligned with the needs and the priorities as expressed by citizens and civil society. Broadening the coalition beyond states and the private sector to bring civil society much more fully into the picture in developing solutions. So I think I will stop here from my side and pass over, if I may, to our other opening speaker, Dr. Kay Rafutoson, the Vice Chair of Transparency International.
So, hi everyone. Very glad to be here. I am Kay, I'm from Madagascar, and I'm, as stated, the Vice Chair of Transparency International. As you know, Transparency International is a global movement which fights against corruption. Our vision is really to hold power into account, and that's what we are doing, we have been doing for the last 30 years. And for since 12 years now, we have invested our efforts into the climate, the fight against climate change, because we are convinced, that corruption is part of the root causes of climate change. It may not seem obvious, but nonetheless, from the studies that we have conducted in more than 30 countries, we are present in more than 100 countries, but we focus our efforts in 30 countries. From those studies, we have seen that corruption fosters, illegal activities like illegal mining, illegal forest logging, wildlife trafficking, and all bad things that foster climate change. Also, the nexus between the environment, land grabbing, and climate change is obvious. So nowadays, the trend is, and this is a global commitment, and this is a positive thing, we are all committed to fight against climate change. But in order to make that efficient and really produce some more impacts, we are convinced that we need also to enhance, this global framework for accountability. And that's why we were very interested in supporting the World Bank's initiative and fostering these collective efforts that we are doing towards, following the money. Where does the money come from? Where does it go? Does it deliver the expected impacts on the ground, especially for the most affected communities? I'm from Madagascar, as I said, and this is one of the countries, which is the most vulnerable to climate change. And when our leaders come here to the UN and elsewhere to claim for some more funding for mitigating the effects of climate change, then as civil society are a bit skeptical and raising our voices saying, do we have enough safeguards, for ensuring that this money will be used in a good way? How can we, civil society, enhance the monitoring also of those rulers, and what procedures they use to allot the money? What is the monitoring framework and everything? So this is in this way that within Transparency International, we've launched the Climate Governance and Integrity Project. And through this project, we created also the Climate Corruption Atlas, which investigates and reports on cases of corruption related to climate action and finance in those 30 countries where we intervene. And so far, we have gathered almost 100 stories of corruption related to climate. And through these risks, we can see what are the loopholes of corruption, and we have recommendations for avoiding them. So once again, following up the money, but also involving citizens in the process. Because climate finance, the objective, I think, is to save the planet, of course, and that's a beautiful goal, but also the humans and all living beings on it. So if we don't involve the human beings, that means the citizens who are supposed to benefit from them, into the process, then we are missing a very important leg of the process. By involving citizens into decision-making processes, but also in following up the money, we are creating this essential leg of social accountability. We can do it in many ways, and experience from various countries show it already, it is working. in Uganda. In Kenya, for instance, our chapters really exposed huge cases of corruption related to climate, and this resulted to the conviction of important people, even politically exposed people. So we want to replicate this chain of integrity because that's what it is. It's fostering, a better planet, a better environment in a sustainable way, and in integrity, where integrity really matters. One of the things that also matters to us is really listening to the voices of the victims of climate change. And I think that through this specific initiative, those voices will be valued. We have our advocacy and legal advice centers throughout the chapters that we have. We are counseling, we are giving free counseling to those victims of corruption, and we are, joining the dots to inform not only the donors involved in the fight against climate change, but also all stakeholders, decision makers, and other CSOs. Multi-stakeholders approach is really crucial in this, and we value the fact that you thought about civil society. We're thankful to be here, and we are ready to provide our expertise and to collaborate in making this happen. Because this year is a turning point. We're here in New York, and there is a lot of events happening around the city. We saw also the adoption of the Pact for the Future. It's all exciting. So the next steps are promising, but we need to do more of it. Beyond commitments, we need action, and I do think that we can all contribute to that. So, yeah, wishing us, a fruitful meeting today. We are convinced once again that the climate
people at the heart of the climate agenda. It's my absolute privilege to welcome these brilliant people to the stage. Obviously, Ali, Anna, Ejaj, Francoise, and Karen. If you could come up on stage and we'll get proper intros for you once you're up here. Welcome. Our brilliant panelists are getting seated, I wanted to feel a little bit the mood music in the audience. Do you think that this has been a sort of people-centered hunger so far between the taxi rides and the weird weather? Are you feeling like we're putting people at the heart of these discussions, or if we're show of hands, yes? Oh, it's a depressing crowd. Okay, we've got one optimist over here. And do you feel like that's partly because it is just complete chaos, or do you think that's a structural thing? Hands up if you think we just fundamentally don't put people at the heart of climate solutions. Okay, it's going to be a depressing group then, but I unfortunately think you might be right. The good news is that the people on this panel are actually doing really powerful, meaningful work to change that, as all of you are in the room. I would like to leave this panel feeling at least equipped, if not optimistic. The one optimist over there will come speak to you later and understand why, but at least equipped to start to shift that, because ultimately this is a people game, and if we forget that, we'll solve for the wrong things. We'll end up doing crazy new technologies which continue to reinforce inequalities or displace Indigenous communities or forget who we're solving for. And so I really want to hold that as we go into this panel. It is my privilege to be here. I chair an initiative called the Blended Finance Task Force, which is all about using public money or philanthropic money to unlock private investment into climate action. And frankly, that is an agenda which feels very financially led rather than people led. And so I also really want to learn on this panel today how we can bring those lessons into conversations around blending and climate finance generally. But firstly, I just want to understand that that's kind of how we're looking at this, and I want to understand from each of our panelists what your organisations do in terms of how you see green accountability, what that means for your organisations. Ali, it's easy to start with you. Please introduce yourself and tell us what the World Bank is doing on green accountability and what it means to you.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and you know, Catherine has been an incredible force for green accountability. The report from Systemic, Better Accountability, Better Finance, really was one of the first to bring, you know, real substance and modeling into why upstream investment in transparency, participation, accountability actually improves the quality of capital. And so, you know, many people in this audience, myself included, need no convincing on the normative argument of why we need to put people first. But it's not just a people discussion. It's a discussion about the quality of capital. It's a discussion about will we succeed on reaching the technical outcomes we want to reach for climate finance and action. So I think that's an important clarion call, because I think that's something that as we reform the international financial architecture, and you heard Robin frame that, one of the first movers for the G20, for the G7, about how the international financial architecture will be renewed, are the IFIs, and amongst the IFIs it is the World Bank. And World Bank renewal, evolution, whatever you want to call it, is focused a lot on the quantum of financing. And the quantum of public financing is critical. There's a reason the world wants the IFIs to work better, because there's no larger source of public international financing and concessional financing than the IFI system. You're not going to create the treasury system, the kind of bond issues that our institutions can do. So that will be a main lever of public international finance. But, you know, the focus on funding governments and funding the private sector is not enough. And neither is simply, you know, first loss capital is important. You know, we're hearing a lot about different kinds of capital stacks and using, you know, small slivers of concessional money to free up larger amounts of private money, and all that's very important. Catherine's actually doing brilliant work on this with many others. But what's the space in the capital stack for all of this? And it takes pennies on the dollars of investment, and Systemic sort of worked up some of these figures of what we need to do to combine these efforts. The challenge also with a lot of the work many of us do is fragmentation. There's a great ecosystem of what I would call islands of excellence, but what we haven't started to do is to systematize and scale. And it's time to take solutions that start at the grassroots, that are delivered through networks, and then frankly can be connected to the larger scale public financing that happens. And that's the vision we have today at the World Bank, and as Robin noted, a vision many of our senior leadership is starting to embrace moving forward. And this is not new for the World Bank. I joined the World Bank as a young pup, actually surprisingly not long after my boss, Robin. I won't give away when Robin joined, but we joined in an era, and both of us often reminisce about this, when participation was at the core of what it was going to be to reinvent the World Bank. When Jim Wolfenson was president of the World Bank, and we were coming off the heels of 50 years is enough, said we need to bring so many other actors into this institution and build those systematic partnerships. Those of you who are old enough to remember might remember the development marketplace, which was quite transformative at the time, of bringing NGOs and CSOs from around the world to the lobby of the World Bank and say, here are solutions we can integrate into World Bank financing. So what we're doing is not entirely new, but we're borrowing from the legacy of a generation or more of efforts to bring these kinds of ideas and solutions into development financing. I won't drone on more, but we'll get into some of the examples and concrete things. I think what we're seeing in the Green Accountability Platform are examples of the scalable solutions, whether it's one of the sub-grantees will fund in Bangladesh, in Senegal, which is going to work on the National Restoration Plan for mangroves and train a network of CSOs. So those large-scale ambitions are actually realized at the community level with community participation, oversight, and solutions. Or it'll be working with the new climate finance system that's being developed in Mexico, where civil society actors, local governments, other actors will be trained to engage on those climate policy finance allocation decisions, to oversee them, to be equipped with the tools and the network development that's necessary to engage. So there's so many ways we can do this, and I think this panel will crack the nut. The thing I leave you with my opening view here is this needs to be part of the renewal of the international financial architecture. I think that's the key thing we're trying to support, at least starting with the World Bank. And so, we're thinking ambitiously, even though this will be a staged approach.
Brilliant, Ali. It sounds very much like green accountability is coming into its own, or should be coming into its own, into the international financial system architecture. But as you say, it's still fragmented, one-off, maybe siloed within these institutions, and it's sometimes the business case, the quality case that you said. If you're actually engaging with communities, with civil society, with people who are impacted by climate finance design and decision making, that you get better outcomes and you don't have that waste of capital deployment. So the business model is clear as well as that normative case. Anna, tell us a bit about what the Climate Collective is doing on green accountability, including the accelerator.
Yes, thank you so much for having us here, first of all. It's really great. I'm excited to learn from all your experiences. Ali and his team has been a fantastic ally to us in our work, so really, really grateful. I'm here with my colleague Jack, who is in the background.
Jack. Where's Jack?
He's standing outside shepherding people in, and Anna right here. So find us after if you want to learn more about our work. First, a second on Climate Collective. Climate Collective is essentially an accelerator and an ecosystem builder. We talked a lot about creating a favorable environment for innovation over the last 10 to 15 years. We're trying to do that specifically for climate technology or nature innovations. We're a nonprofit. We're made up by entrepreneurs, scientists, other nonprofits, engineers, and indigenous peoples who are all working on building technology to advance or accelerate progress towards climate or nature goal. Just a quick raise of hands. How many of you are aware of the Paris Agreement as a large kind of global climate goal? Okay, fantastic, wonderful. This is really not the room that I normally speak to. What about the biodiversity framework, which is sort of its sister framework on the nature side? Okay, fantastic, great. So we all know what we're driving towards. We fundamentally believe that data and digital technology can help accelerate progress towards meeting those goals. It can also keep the world accountable while we try to get to those goals, but also to the quality of the implementation of those goals. Inclusion of local communities and underrepresented people, indigenous people, is obviously fundamental to getting climate solutions right. I mean, the same goes for nature, but I'm going to lump them now. One of the most powerful ways to increase effectiveness and impact, I would say, is to work on solutions that are designed, co-owned, created by the people who are impacted by them, and that will have to implement them or live with them. That's easy to say, so what does that mean in reality? At Climate Collective, we think of ourselves often as like this bridge between the thinking and the data, and I would say maybe the opportunity space, sort of what needs to be done, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges that we need to solve, and the execution. We really think that technology can help amplify this. We talked about the ability to scale and have people-driven solutions. That for me is really centered to using technology in a responsible way. We have people in our collective that are working on unlocking finance. We have groups that are working on simplifying individual action, sort of motivating people to contribute more in their daily lives. Other groups that are looking at keeping companies or governments accountable for what they promise and what they may or may not deliver. I want to specifically flag two things. One is this really incredible technology accelerator that we've been doing together with the World Bank. It really came as this beautiful sort of thought child of our two teams, where we were like, how do we get technology and innovation into this? And we kind of centered around this idea of, let's put this out to the world. Let's try to define better what green accountability is and why it really matters. And then let's bring local communities, let's bring nonprofits, let's bring civil society into the conversation and let them show us what they're working on, the technology they're working on, and then we're trying to amplify it.
Hear more about how we can get involved with the accelerator as well. Ajaj, am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Roughly, close enough. You are actually the person I was most excited to meet. Wonderful to meet the rest of you, but you particularly, because I think maybe you sit here listening to these conversations and go, oh, it's all really nice that you want to have a people-centered approach, but you're missing a very specific focus on youth. And I wonder if that was a kind of a reaction, maybe to the week, if not to today, you know, a reaction that resonates, or if you think we're getting this right, we're putting youth at the heart of climate finance, you know, give us some reflections on what you guys are doing to make this work.
Thank you, appreciate it. Great question. I'm delighted to meet everyone. I think to respond to your question first, then I'll introduce myself. I think young people expect meaningful participation, okay? It's not just you have one young person in an advisory capacity. I think what young people want is they should be part of the decision-making process. If you're allocating funding, if you're, you know, whatever you're doing, meaningful youth participation is what is required. I think there is an opportunity for improvement.
Who's young here today? Young at heart or young? Give us an under 30 hands up. Is that the definition of young?
I mean, you know, in different countries they define, the UN defines it below 32, so we can go with that definition.
Young people, give us a hands up. Cool, we might come to you later.
In terms of my work, just to set the context, I was in the Obama campaign when I was in graduate school, and my inspiration was to go back to Bangladesh and create a leadership program where anyone, regardless of their family background, can aspire to be in the highest office. So I started a leadership program teaching young people to ask questions, to challenge authority, to be inclusive, and to give them skills to communicate clearly, to organize, and all of that. Okay, so that was my theory. I did not know what would become of that. But yesterday I was listening to one of my program alum. He's 26 years old. When he was 18, he came to our program in Bangladesh at BYLC. He learned about leadership, how to communicate well. And now he's the advisor of Professor Yunus, who's now the interim government head in Bangladesh. And he's the, you know, one of the key coordinators of this whole revolution that just happened in Bangladesh. 15-year-old regime was overthrown by young people, incredible leadership. But sometimes, the reason I'm saying this is when you make investments in young people, you don't know what the return will be, but we need to have the faith that we have to invest in young people, give them the opportunities, and extraordinary things can happen. So I ran that leadership program in Bangladesh. I'm, you know, training young people to change society, not to overthrow any government. That's not our agenda. We're a small, non-partisan.
Heard it here first, folks.
We are a non-partisan, non-political, small, non-profit, just, you know, providing education to young people. But then when Bangladesh turned 50, one of my realization was climate change is the biggest issue facing Bangladesh, and it's a global problem. You cannot solve the climate crisis through a national lens. So that's when I launched the Global Leadership, Youth Leadership Center. And the theory of change is very simple. When you're working with young people, to solve any problem, first you need to have an appreciation of the nature of the problem. What is the problem? What is causing the problem? So we educate young people on climate science. Young people need to have a very good understanding of, you know, technical things, climate science, how is my behavior, my eating habits, my lifestyle contributing to a warming planet? Because all the young people we work with in Africa, South America, Asia, they're experiencing extreme weather events, but they cannot connect it to their behavior. How is their behavior contributing to a warming planet? So we teach them the basics of climate science. And we work with people like Sir David King, top climate scientists around the world. We sort of, you know, use their content, educate young people. Sometimes in life, you have the knowledge, but you cannot take action, right? We all know honesty is important, not to engage in corrupt activities is important, or many things we have it at the knowledge level, but we cannot practice. For that, you need leadership training, leadership capability, willpower, persistence, character, a set of competencies. We have defined it, so we provide the leadership training to young people. So you have knowledge, you have leadership training, and the third thing we do at the Global Youth Leadership Center is connect young people to resources. Because when you're working with a young person in Dar es Salaam, they understand climate science, they have the leadership capability, they want to execute a project in their community, they don't have the resources. So we connect them to funders, we fund them, we give them resources. So climate science education, leadership training, and then supporting young people to take climate action on the ground. But because of the nature of the problem, the crisis we're in right now, you cannot just solve it by planting 10 mangroves. It's exciting, it's important, but that's not it. At 420 parts per million, where we are right now, we're not going to meet the Paris Agreement goals. I mean, we have to be fooling ourselves if we say that, yes, we're on track. We're not on track. We're already at 1.35 degrees, so there's no way we're going to meet those targets. So you have local action, but young people globally need to put pressure on their governments. That's where green accountability comes in, and we have partnered with Ali and the wonderful team. We have created an online course on green accountability. The same thing, but leveraging technology, because we also feel that you have to scale, and unless you leverage technology, how are you going to scale? So we've launched an online course with GPSA on this subject, on green accountability, giving leadership training for young people in Ghana, Namibia, Cameroon, Bangladesh, Nepal. That was our target. But then after launching the course, we couldn't lock the IP addresses, so it became a global thing. Now young people, more than 365 young people from 25 countries are, they finished the course and more are signing up. So that's how we are making a contribution. But when it comes to green accountability, I'll just end there. We need coalitions of young people because I think it's not in the interest of any politician to address a global problem. Politicians are incentivized to address their national problems. I care about my votes because my votes will keep me in power. So what's my incentive for a US president to worry if Pakistan is flooded or Bangladesh is flooded? Why does it matter? What matters is, are my constituents happy? That's my primary interest. That's why we need young people, a new generation that can collaborate across boundaries and have this global mindset and work towards global solutions to this. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add. I would add, it's not just a global mindset, it's also a longer term mindset. We need quick wins, obviously, because you've got that political dynamic, but if you can't sort of have a parallel track, that long-term mindset, you're always going to have the wrong incentives. Talk about people with short-term mindsets. The World Economic Forum obviously engages with business extensively. I'm going to make you the villain on this panel, Francois, so that'll be fun for you guys. Tell us what the WEF feels about green accountability. Is it a new term? Is it kind of centered to what you do? We'd love to hear.
I'm not going to answer your questions, since you put me in the deep end very quickly there. But I will speak about actually the topic about putting people in the center, because I think that's at the heart of this discussion. And of course, so my role at the World Economic Forum is actually heading 3 foundations, which is all about putting people at the center of the global agenda. So I just want to say your work is incredible. One of those communities is called the Global Shapers, and if any of you have heard of them, 18,000 young people in 150 countries and 500 hubs in the world who are self-organized for local action, bringing those people to the seat at the table. And how do you do that in meaningful ways? Around the table with decision makers, leaders of business and government is part of that kind of whole mandate. The other 2, one is also focused on younger leaders under the age of 40, and the other is really working with social innovators that we're going to talk about a little bit today, and with the new civic facility. So that kind of mechanism has been built, recognizing that the World Economic Forum is an international organization around public-private cooperation, but is also a network of leaders. How do you ensure, when leaders are talking about how they're going to shift and make decisions around the global agenda, that you do have these important perspectives in the room as peers? And that's really our job, is to put young people, to put people representing grassroots initiatives and organizations are there. I want to switch quickly to social innovators, because this is really this, and why do we even use the term social innovators? I don't know, it's kind of, there's lots of words that are used there, but it's about recognizing that we still work, and our whole kind of capitalist economy still works in the industrial era model, right? And we've kind of had this dichotomy of non-profits and for-profits, which we've not really been able to break out of, and I think social enterprise, social innovation has been the space to think about alternatives to how we build economies, how we build inclusive spaces and markets and how we build sustainable markets, because we can have alternative financing, but we also need alternative models of delivering that in creative ways. And that's why I've spent the last 20 years looking at social enterprise. We released a report this year that looked at the scope and scale of social enterprise. We had only data in 80 countries in the world, but even that shows that there are more than 10 million social enterprises in the world. That's 3% of all companies. That's 200 million jobs. That's more than 2 trillion in annual revenues. That is no longer just, okay, a set of strange alternatives that people doing on the side doing creative things. This is actually now becoming part of how our new economy could be shaped, and is a set of demonstrable approaches of business models that put people and planet first in that business model. And of course, there needed to be an alternative to traditional charity, which was often not scalable in their approaches, but still keep the representation of people in those spaces. So that's kind of why I've been so excited about this space, because I think it gives us models for the future. The other thing I wanted to really emphasize, and just I should pay tribute to the work that the bank is doing in this evolution, is going beyond the kind of consultative way of designing this new facility. And so I even saw it's even written in here that this will be a sustained approach. And you talk about, well, people don't just want to be tokenized, right? That actually the way that I've seen Ali, you go and your team go around building this is a deeper level of understanding, consultation, design, and you've been very intentional about it in how it hopefully will be sustained. And I wanted to also reflect on kind of the word accountability, because trust in institutions is pretty low in the world right now. And there's some really interesting research on institutional trust around transparency, accountability, inclusion, and consistency. And I think if those are the principles that remain at the heart of the way you get people together. And so while many of that is technology solutions, the intentionality to keep kind of people at the center of technology as well, I think, is a critical piece. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Brilliant, and I'm going to come back and press you on my business question later. But
sorry, I can't address it now, or you can come back to it.
I'll come back to it, because it's. But thank you for dodging the question and answering your comments so brilliantly. Really appreciate the emphasis on social enterprise, particularly. Karen, it's a pleasure to have you with us, because I know you've worn many hats over your sort of career, and you're now at WRI. So tell us what WRI sort of thinks about when they hear green accountability. But it's also interesting from a government lens, maybe you want to bring that into in terms of the engagement you've had with the Brazilian government recently.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. So I'm WRI for the last 3 months, and I've been an executive officer for the federal government in Brazil for the past 15 years, lastly at the president's office, and I've been always in charge of the climate national policy, playing different roles, climate change fund, climate national policy, and also drafting our national adaptation strategy that was back at our first NDC 2015. And what I see now, having this experience in coming to WRI, is that green accountability is about governance and transparency. And the work that we have in your head is so exciting in terms of not only strengthening these networks with civil society and other NGOs, but also bringing innovative solutions. And the experience I had in the past while drafting our national adaptation plan is that actually when you have strong civil society sector involved in the process, you're not only gaining quality, but you actually speed up the process and the pace of public engagement. So Brazil is a big federal country. We are over 212 million people, 27 states, almost 6,000 municipalities. Now, being at a federal office and just looking at your country through numbers and pie charts, when you actually call on social participation and you have strong NGOs that have data, they have quality, they have local information, you actually gain a lot of layers of knowledge into the process. And of course, it eases the federal relations. So we could count a lot on having our strong civil society agents in place to call on state level and municipal levels to also engage into the process of planning to have adaptation strategies. And I think the same systems are in place now, although we cannot take for granted that good governance is the premise. Looking at Brazil's case and looking at the Latin American region and most of the countries in the world, we just passed through some hard years. And all our governance committees and systems were wiped out, not only for the climate policy, but for many other thematic policies. And all of a sudden, civil participation and society participation into those many processes were just deleted out of the map. So how do you do not only participation, but data? Data from government sites were simply deleted. And the processes of the Statistic Bureau or database its provision were also frozen and stopped. So when we came to restore the country back in 2023, we had to do for our first year? Call on civil society experts and academics that had historical data and design of committees and processes to call it all back again. And in fact, my full year in 2023 was to redesign all of the environmental committees and governance systems that we used to have in Brazil, and I really needed to rely a lot on the expertise that was lying there on civil society and all the data that was missed, but for somehow they kept it. So I think that's much more than climate. In fact, I've been doing climate change job for my whole life, but it's about democratic values and peace in the end. So I think it's a fundamental job. And of course, we all want to discuss all the cutting edges issues such as finance, blended finance. These are important deals to break. But honestly, the basics of good governance and transparency are still much needed everywhere.
Thank you, Annette. It's really interesting, Karen, because you've sort of given us a very clear what happens if you don't have green accountability. That is important to hold in this conversation because people, maybe they don't necessarily understand the risk if you don't have transparency, accountability, inclusive and participative ways of designing, particularly climate finance, because it's the hottest thing right now, but I know we can apply it to other areas as well. And it's not only the sort of risks if you don't have green accountability, but then there's this upside, which Ali, you've described that quality, but you also mentioned speed, which is very powerful. And then what I hear from the sort of middle three panelists is that there are solutions to ensure that we have faster, easier, innovative ways to drive green accountability with technology, with youth, with social enterprise, public-private philanthropic partnerships. And so I want to dig into that because we know what happens if you don't have it. A lot of shit goes wrong. We've seen that in Brazil and other countries, and we've seen real transformation when you engage with civil society. But what can happen when things go right? And I want to start with you, Ali, because the bank and its relationship with civil society is an ongoing and now, for me, really inspiring sort of part of the work that you're doing. What's the upside? What are you really pioneering this year, if you can talk about Civic, I hope?
So, I think as I've been going around town this week, I've been struck by being in two different kinds of spaces, being in spaces which are about one pillar of this equation. It's the private sector, it's the public sector, it's the social sector. So I think the World Bank and the IFIs are uniquely positioned to be a connective tissue between these three. Right now, we're primarily designed to work with sovereign lending and lend money to countries and increasingly use that as catalytic funding to drive in much larger volumes of private financing and include doing our own private financing. In fact, when the IFC was stood up by the World Bank, people said, what? The World Bank is going to be funding private sector organizations. It was actually quite a revolutionary concept at the time. And in fact, when the GPSA was launched after the Arab Spring, you may not know this story, the president of the World Bank and some of our senior leadership at the time said, we're not going to solve these problems and these crises unless we also systematically bring in the social sector. Now, I'm proud of what the GPSA has done over its years, but it never scaled to becoming the IFC of civil society that was the vision of the framers. Now, I think the positive side of the story is super important. And I think, I like to say we live, we're coming out of a highly technocratic age, and these were, very technocratic institutions that were developed. When we look at issues like climate change, there's so much intersectionality, and there really is a need for a new kind of systems thinking to solve these problems. So if you look at something as simple as protecting carbon sinks, if I go to a private sector discussion, and I was at one last night where I heard a bit of that, Catherine, is that, this is about pricing carbon, this is about getting the pricing right, then enough people will buy, the carbon credits and the problem will be solved. Well, sorry, that's not going to be the case, because if you don't have stewardship of highly localized localities, take the Amazon, for example. We all want to protect the Amazon. Who's stewarding the ecosystems that literally vary hectare by hectare? Those are local communities. Now, those local communities need to access that large-scale money we're talking about here in New York or Washington, but what does it mean when that cascades down? You actually have to build an architecture to do that well, and you have to build it systemically into the philanthropic and nonprofit sector. It can't just be fund my little project either. It has to be all linked together. So if we're going to solve things systemically, we need tools. Now, civic is not going to be the panacea, but it is one tool that we can embed in a place that makes these large-scale decisions and informs government. So it's an enabling tool in that regard, which hopefully can influence an ecosystem of enabling and connecting institution. It's the connective tissue that's missing. What's not missing are incredibly effective local solutions. What's not missing is incredible networks of social innovation. What's missing is connecting public, private, and social sectors in a systematic way. And that's the hope. And that's not only the hope, I think it's the only way we're going to solve a lot of these problems. But it's shocking in each pillar how little the other knows about the other. And that's the problem we face today. And I see the young people in the room, and I'm a youth alum, so I like to have some affinity to them, but they think differently, honestly. You see much more of that systemic thinking is coming naturally to younger people, just because of the problems they're thinking about and facing today. So I do think part of this is about generational change. I'll be frank, we need a newer generation of leaders and thinkers and doers to come into all of this.
Well, you mentioned youth and the Amazon, so I'm going to go to Ejaj and then back to you, Karen. So we'll mix it up a little bit and try and keep this dialogue sort of really connected. But well, we've just talked about youth a lot. Are we know what you're doing. And we know what this room can do. What's the message to the leaders out there if they are trying to say, well, climate finance is going to have a higher quality if youth is involved. Climate finance deployment is going to be more long-term, be more global. What's the how? How do you actually do that? What we've heard about now, your work, particularly around knowledge and leadership, but that's really equipping youth. What do we need to do to equip the old fellows at the decision makers in the UN?
I think we need to have more intergenerational dialogue. I think the more conversations that you have, and we also facilitate that because we're talking about the Amazons in April 2025. We are collaborating with the government of Brazil, with the Minister of Environment and Luciana Santos' communication team. The minister, they'll be coming to Belo Horizonte, the state of Minas Gerais. We are hosting at the University of Minas Gerais a large global youth climate summit where all the decision makers will come, young people from around the world will come, and we're going to co-create a manifesto which we want to set the agenda, the youth agenda for COP30 in Belém. So that's how we engage with adults or decision makers. That facilitation is important. That's one.
Do the adults like that?
I think they're receptive. What needs to happen more is, look, I am a big supporter of under 35s running the world, okay? And my mentor, Professor Yunus, is a supporter of that, and he's got like 2 25-year-olds who are ministers in Bangladesh right now. They're running multiple ministries, 25-year-old guys, okay? And we are trying to figure out, can under 35s really take over, launch a party, and run the country? I think that's a great thing, because it's their future at stake. They care a lot about the future, as opposed to someone who's 85, right? Because they've got longer to live, so they care more about the planet. So we need more young people in decision-making positions and platforms. That's number one. And the second thing is, To address the climate crisis, I think we all agree we need innovation, and innovation comes from experimentation, and experiments have a high failure rate. So we have to bet on young people, give them resources to try out new ideas. I know you're doing it through the Climate Collective. We have done this over the last 5 years. We've invested in 35 youth-led companies. Many of them failed, but someone has to write the first check and let a 25-year-old, 24-year-old start a business. Your first business may not become a unicorn, but you started it. And the other thing that needs to happen in the context of Global South is we need to be talking about SMEs, not just startups. Startups are very cool, they sound great, but not all businesses will have a technology component. You can have a solid cash flow positive business, SME, and that's the kind of work that needs to happen that we are promoting, particularly in East Africa, West Africa, and South Asia.
Thank you. And then back over to you, Karen, because Ali also mentioned the Amazon particularly, and we know that green accountability has a very special role when we talk about natural capital, indigenous communities, and of course youth as well. But what is the next government in Brazil, current G20 president, host of COP30, are they internalizing this, and how can this room help internalize that, particularly with such a critical set of decision-making milestones over the next couple of, next 18 months?
Yeah, being a Brazilian, there's no single day that I don't think of COP30, you can imagine. Well, what we're doing is that we're stretching our views. Of course, we are part of the Troika, and that starts with COP29, and it goes up until COP31, Australia, right? So we have that leverage period to influence and assist now and next presidents also in getting an action agenda that will be meaningful and will take us to carbon neutrality by 2050. But one striking thing is to think of, have you realized that doesn't really matter what NDCs are promising really now and COP29, the ones that are going to be delivered, because the gases that will be accounted for in 2035 are already emitted, right? So how can we actually work to actually understand the mitigation curves that are being put forward by governments in a correct manner and something that is meaningful and trustful? And I think the stretching analysis that I would like to poke you with is to think of carbon neutrality in 2050. I think that was something that leaves room to maneuver and to have actually meaningful and impactful action. Honestly, if not by CDR technology, 2035 is already emitted. And we have to understand that. And we have to think through 2050. I think that's a point. Of course, to deliver neutrality by 2050 means that we need now close new financial deals. And that's a big point that we are all looking for at COP29, because if the deal on finance is not done, it's going to be left to Brazil to do the remainings. So they are considering how to utilize the process, the decision-making process of the finance deal and CQG. But still there are other issues that will be much important for, I think, this work that we do with civil society that is related to adaptation and the global goal on adaptation. That work plan is to be closed by COP30 by the end of 2025, and that will bring concrete, tangible indicators in 11 sectors to assess and understand how countries across the world are adapting. And I think that's a critical point, that we can work together, not only producing knowledge, but bridging knowledge that is being done by all of the civil society and grassroots movements into government, into the UNFCCC processes. And this is the year from now up until the COP30. And another spot that I think is really important to work and connect is bringing NGOs and grassroots movements under to the debate of the framework for global resilience under the UNFCCC. So I think those are the two main negotiation tracks that would be the most important linkages to the work that we are going to do. And with our partners under the Green Accountability Project in Brazil, we're going to be following on those topics, as well on climate finance for adaptation. And I think that's incredible because we're going to be monitoring public money, which is another area that is quite blurred. I mean, few countries actually are very transparent on where they put their public money and how that's effectively transforming to adaptive or resilient processes. So one of our partners will do that, and others will also work in empowering those leaders, bringing information not only related into UNFCCC related processes, but overall environmental policies. So I think we will be able to bridge those connections and have an impactful delivery of message to Brazilian government and to the partners of the consortium.
Thank you. And Anna, I'm interested if you see the sort of role of the Green Accountability Technology Accelerator could help with some of that. You know, how do you scale it up? How do you plug it into these various decision-making sort of processes and initiatives?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was kind of like jumping when several of you are talking. First, I couldn't agree with you more. Writing checks for young people, it's really hard, but it's so important. And I would encourage you all to think about something that we think a lot about at the Climate Collective. We know that early stage companies, we have 60 members, and not all of them will become tech unicorns. That's very clear. Many of them will fall. But the talent that they're cultivating within these teams can, with a little help and guidance, land in another team. And maybe that's the team that will make it. And the just kind of supporting community building means that these founders and their teams are stronger, more connected, and when challenges arise, they sort of can kind of reach out. So this whole systems approach of connecting people is so, so important. So just wanted to emphasize the point you made. And also on your concern about the NDCs, we could talk for hours and hours about the challenges of the NDCs and how the lack of teeth in them and how hard they are to finance. But I do think that actually AI, that's actually an interesting space where AI can certainly help, both in terms of looking at sort of comparing what's going on the ground using satellite imagery and sort of like, is something being built there, even though it was promised 4 years ago, but also thinking about like, okay, they said they wanted to do X, we have a limited amount of money, is there a more effective way to channel that funding to get the same type of outcome? So I'm encouraged and positive. I think we have some solutions. Back to your question. Climate technology has evolved a lot. My first job in climate happened same year that Facebook was launched, and let's just say that that's a long time ago. At that point, we didn't even have cell phones for payments. We couldn't take pictures and use the data in that picture as an evidence for a tree planted, for example. We can do all those things today. Cell phones, in fact, have tons of sensors that most of you don't think about, but maybe you've been counting your steps or you've been walking here in New York. That's all sensors in your phones, and you can use those sensors to measure environmental nature impacts around you. So there's so much incredible data today that we didn't have before. When we started kind of encouraging the climate tech community to think about green accountability, most of them went for sort of low-hanging fruits. I'm a tech company or a tech startup, I'm going to solve something that is in my control. I have this data, here we go. When we ran the applications for the Green Accountability Accelerator, the one criteria that almost all of them fell on was there was no engagement with anyone. There was, we were going to produce a map and give it to the world, or we're going to share something, or we're going to make our own solution and hope that someone buys it. That's not green accountability, that's climate tech. It could also be useful, but we're talking about this interaction. How do we engage civil society? How do we engage young people? How do we bring the participation into these climate action, climate finance, climate monitoring, whatever it is? So I'm encouraged to know, maybe to announce, should I?
Yeah, I was about to say announce it.
Okay, so I'm very excited to let
drum
you
roll.
all know. Exactly, drum roll.
And then tell them about Savimbo too.
Yes, okay. I'm really excited about telling you all that we're securing new funding for a second round of accelerators. So we're going to do more about this work, more on this work. We are together with the bank, we are actively seeking additional funders too, because we think other organizations you might have money or you might have connections and networks that you think can bring to. So I'm going to come look for you later, my friend, because I think pulling in your youth network could be incredibly impactful. Bringing in your social entrepreneurs through the WEF is really impactful, and obviously let's build towards COP30. Maybe there can be showcases out there. So clearly we've already made partnerships here now. It's just, but I want to leave you with 2 examples.
But the AI dimension.
Right, exactly. Thank you for keeping me honest. That's true, that's true. So one of the things that we're bringing in for the next accelerator is really this focus on AI. AI is, I'm very torn. I ran Facebook's partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals for many years. And one of the biggest impacts we had to bring, one of our superpowers, was our AI capabilities, or their AI capabilities. I still think it's incredibly impactful and can do so much for making sense of large data sets and helping us see new things, look at where the impact can actually be traced to. But when we're talking about accountability here, let's also remember that, SDG 7 was my home for a long time inside the bank. There's still 700 million people that don't have access to electricity. The more we all want AI solutions on our cell phones, there's an opportunity cost to who's using electricity. So I think we're so happy about this. Now he also represents one of the teams in the accelerators. So 2 things that really stood out, 2 teams really stood out for us when we got the applications. One was a team that was looking at carbon markets. So you might not agree, but I fundamentally think that market mechanisms are really important as a way to drive capital to the global south to address some of these climate issues. But climate markets need to be equitable. Carbon markets has this potential of driving funding to local communities or indigenous people or others involved, but it's not always the case. In this lack of trust that my friend Wef talked about, it matters what you do. It doesn't really matter so much what you say. So how do you show what you do? There was a nonprofit in West Africa that reached out and said, we are building out a governance structure where we're working with the community to empower the negotiators of the community to negotiate better benefit sharing agreements when carbon project developers come to our community. They wanted to automate this process and scale it and make it open source and available to other communities around the world that have similar opportunities. This for me is a perfect example of green accountability in action. The other one, and now we can talk more about this one as well, the other one is from a group called Livable. They're an indigenous-led biodiversity credit project developer and working in the Amazon. They came to us and said, oftentimes our communities are not using the same traditional banking systems that others are. So if a project developer creates a project in this vicinity, it's not always easy for them to pay the community, nor is it always that easy for the community to figure out how to do a transparent sort of sharing of the proceeds and divide the resources in a transparent way. So Savimo proposed to build their own digital payment solutions with a system that works for all of the indigenous communities in their area, and then make this app open source so other indigenous communities or other local communities around the world could use this. So that's another example where they are talking about a concrete, specific opportunity they have to participate in these markets, but they have sort of a technology issue that's holding them back. So I'm gonna hand this over now, but I just want to say again, so grateful to the bank for this really important partnership that we have with them, and I'm really thrilled to have one of our accelerator participants in the room. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, final question before I come to our panelists to wrap up, but I think it's quite interesting that, Anna, you talked before those brilliant examples quite a lot about this need for interaction, connection, networks, and Francois, I really am keen to understand what we can learn from the work you're doing with social entrepreneurs, of course, seeing the sort of philanthropic angle within the forum, but also understanding that dynamic of public and private. And what are the learnings that we can take into the rest of this week? And of course, the sort of processes which are designed to try and deploy climate finance. They're designed to make green work. This is a very long question, but really, what can we learn?
Yeah, I think Ali referred to the fact that we need, and everyone knows, we need to join all these things up, right? from across sectors, but also across the scales, from the grassroots through to the kind of multilateral. So
you have to read Francois's book on this. It is incredible.
thank you.
Tell us the name of the book, go on.
It's not that exciting. Well, it was an exploration into systemic change, because I think the language has been used a lot. And initially delving into that, the original title of the book was Just Stop, because we're all messing it up. And after I got out of that very pessimistic period, saw lots of hope in how that could be done. But it's called the systems work of social change. It's talking about the work we need to do, the practical ways in which we do systemic work, rather than some, idealistic future about systems change that we talk about. And so it's about the process of how we do work, and how we think and work systemically in everything that we do. And as you said, I think one of you said that young people are growing up with a much more systemic lens because of how they see the world they're inheriting. But a couple of points to pick up on, and kind of how we joined some of these dots, was that whether it's indigenous communities, local communities, young people, the consultation, we're beyond the consultation period. And I think we've two things. So one is about getting resources and finance into the hands of people. So we actually do with our global shapers, they do climate reality training, and we actually do grants of between $5,000 to $20,000 to get young people to start working on these projects. So we know that that's part of it. But then also there's the finance piece, but then I'm really interested in hearing about your report and learning more, because it's also about these ownership models, right? Because you can perhaps participate in an economy, but you don't actually have any ownership of it. So that's also what the space of social enterprise has been experimenting with, whether it's everything from cooperatives to using blockchain to using technology to actually bring models of ownership. And again, young people want to participate, but actually be owners of the economic models as well. And so I think that's what's really exciting about the growing space of the social economy. And I wanted to actually refer to, because we're here in New York last year, there was a United Nations General Assembly resolution on the social and solidarity economy for the first time, recognizing. And actually point 3, I brought it up this morning, encourages multilateral, international, regional financial institutions and development banks to support the social and solidarity economy through existing and new financial instruments and mechanisms adapted to all stages of development. The thing with resolutions is they're just resolutions until someone starts to do something. So I think, however much, you're starting off with civic, it also sends a really important signal to others that, we need new ways of actually delivering capital to the things that work and joining these things up. So I'm excited and inspired by this new era. The work of the people on this panel, I think, is extremely important. And it is about connecting what is already happening on the ground into becoming a real part of our building a real sustainable economy. Private sector. Sorry, keep avoiding your questions. First of all, because I don't really represent the private sector in that part, I don't feel I can speak entirely upon them. But of course, doing any of this work without the private sector is fooling ourselves. And so, bringing them into the spaces and alliances where we go beyond commitments into ways in which they can really make a difference. We see some of the big levers in being in procurement. So if you want to think about how do we get all of these smaller organizations, whether they're participating in the economy, we can do development financing, we can do philanthropy, but actually procurement is in the trillions of dollars. And if we can get 1% of procurement, there's a lot of work happening around procurement in the environmental space, but also in the social space, recognizing that social procurement is now a very significant way of actually delivering a societal impact. So there's quite a significant amount of work we're doing with the private sector on that. Of course, there are a lot of other things that that the private sector and business needs to stop doing, and there's self-industry-led measures and there's regulatory measures. So, our work is really focused on ensuring that we can actually tap into the power and resources of business to enable what we've been talking about today.
Brilliant. I knew you would get there in the end. You'd answer the question in the end. No, it's brilliant. It's a privilege to have moderated such a superstar panel. Normally, I would ask a panel to say, what are you going to do now, having heard your fellow panelists? What are you going to change? What are you going to do differently in your organisation, but actually the doers are here. It's quite special and quite inspiring. And so my final question, rapid fire, you've got 30 seconds each to answer and I'll be strict, but what are you going to ask others to do so that we don't just have the resolution that sounds nice, but that actually green accountability is embedded not just in the World Bank, but in the other multilaterals, not just in an accelerator, but actually that it scales and is used across the world, and particularly in these important decision-making moments. So what are you asking? What's the big ask? Because this room can amplify your asks. Which way am I going to begin? I think I'm going to start with you, Karen. We'll work our way back down, end with Ali, and then we'll go into the breakouts.
Yeah, I'll just repeat my message. I think bring solutions to neutrality by 2050. I think that's what we need for now, and that's what we can actually impact.
Next year when I get invited to a panel, I'm going to ask someone else to do it who's actually more representative of these solutions. So that's what I'm going to do.
It's been brilliant. We're very pleased to have you, so don't say that.
No, I'm genuinely, I always think it's a genuine talk.
My ask to myself and to everyone else would be say what you mean, and if you say something, do it. Keep your word.
I would, Climate Collective members do this every day, but I would encourage others to just go out and do things. We've been at so many COPs, we've been at so many climate weeks, we just need to do the work now. So that's my encouragement to everyone I speak to.
So I think, we need a clarion call. I mean, we're here this week, and the big words in the space most of our colleagues from the World Bank are living in is international financial architecture reform. Big clunky words with a lot of potential meaning. How do we seriously bring people into that? We throw around civil society and inclusion and participation. These words make the communiques. Let's make it real. This civic is one measure, but there are many others that need to happen. And so I think bringing together the social movements we talk about, the networks that are there, the solutions that are there, but connecting it to finance, I think is critical. Because there isn't enough resources right now going to this work, and these things often happen adjacent to the big work. They have to become part and parcel of the big work. So as we move forward to COP, as we move forward to Rio, think systematically how people get put first and how those things that people will do and that enable those people and organizations are going to be funded. And so for Civic, our ask to you, we are going to launch this, we hope, very soon formally. We're soft launching it here, is we need donors to come in. We need governments to hear. The World Bank will be considering its own financial contribution as well as seed financing. But we need partnerships to come in, not only for the money, but also to bring in those pipelines of scalable solutions. So show us also that there are scalable solutions. There are